Snakeskin leather is an exotic material often known for its unique scale pattern. It is very commonly used in the fashion industry for shoes, belts, handbags, and accessories. The most popular types of snakeskin include python and boa. This material is often treated and dyed for a stylish look and increased durability. Let's take a brief look at its history. The use of snakeskin likely dates back to ancient times. Archaeological findings show that ancient Egyptians used snakeskin for clothing, accessories, and other decorative purposes. Snakes were very symbolic in Egyptian mythology, and their skins were associated with protection and status. Over time, it was generally more limited in its availability than more common leathers like cowhides and sheepskins. However, snakeskin leather continued to be used across different cultures throughout the Middle Ages. It was often used to embellish clothing, accessories, and armor, although the availability was still limited and reserved primarily for the elite. With the expansion of global trade during the 15th through 17th centuries, exotic materials, including snakeskin, became more accessible to the European markets. Increasing demand for the unique material also led to more use among the upper classes. This continued well into the 19th century, and then as the advent of chrome tanning became more popular, so did the availability of many types of leathers. Follow that through the Industrial Revolution, and we saw an even wider variety of materials available to all levels of society. Today, snakeskin continues to be a really high-end luxury material valued for its unique look and texture. However, it's now available to all of us. Most crafters can have access to this and create some pretty unique goods, and you may have seen some of these out there, including belts and shoes and accessories. So let's take a closer look. Here's a zoomed in view of the top of snakeskin leather. And wow, it's really different than typical leather. You can see here, already from the start, a very unique scaling pattern. And on top of that, you see some very unique coloring as well. While on a cowhide type leather, you're going to see a grain pattern. Here, we're essentially seeing a scale pattern. And you have these oval nodules that kind of overlap. And that's going to create a relatively rough, durable, scratch-resistant surface on top of this material. Looking at the bottom, we see a really fine, tight grain pattern. It still has a little bit of fuzziness to the fibers, if you were to feel it, and has a tactile sensation of softness to it. However, when compared to, say, a bovine leather or something like that, this has a relatively dense grain pattern and is going to be a little bit smoother. And here in the cross section, we really could see what's going on. That top layer with the scales, comparatively, is relatively thin to the rest. However, it's a very dense and durable surface layer. It gives it a lot of strength, even though it's not very thick. And as we go in towards the middle of the hide, we see the fibers begin to open up a little bit, although comparatively, they're still pretty dense. And then we work through into the bottom, we see them get a little larger and a little wider. I know in a natural leather like a cow leather, those fibers are going to get much bigger towards the bottom. So it's interesting here that in the snakeskin leather, we see that even though they get bigger, it's not hugely bigger. There's still a pretty tight, dense pattern throughout. Snakeskin leather is relatively strong and durable, and you can see exactly why, because it has a really nice fiber structure through the entire material. When looking at the production process, making snakeskin leather is similar to most other types. It's typically prepared first through a tanning process that is either a vegetable tanned or a chrome tanned. The vegetable tanning process utilizes astringents from leaves and tree bark to essentially process the hide. When using chrome tanning, it uses chromium salts in leather baths to help process that leather. Whereas vegetable tanning can take anywhere from weeks to months, chrome tanning typically only takes a few days. It also yields a softer, more flexible leather. And about 90% of all leather is chrome tanned, and a lot of snakeskin leather is chrome tanned as well. When looking at the cost, there's going to be a few key variables here. Snakeskin is usually sold by the meter, which is approximately 3 feet. That's going to be around $40 to $80 per meter. Now, the variability comes in that there are a lot of different types of snakes. Some are going to be very large, some very small, some very wide, some very narrow. So this is a very ballpark range. And typically you're only going to be able to buy it, by the like entire hide. So this is for comparison as well. So like for example, a full python hide, maybe around $100. A type of Burmese python, maybe around $250. So it depends on its length and also the type of hide that it is. A few other things to keep in mind are going to be obviously the quality of the hide and the quality of the tanning process. Anything that has a higher quality process that comes out looking ultimately better, that grades higher, that has few or no blemishes on the finished hide is usually going to command a higher cost. But in general, very broadly speaking, around $40 to $80 per meter. You can definitely get them cheaper in some cases and certainly more expensive as well. Some pros of snakeskin leather is first and foremost the style. It is an instantly recognizable style, very unique, and the textures that combine with the colors of the snakeskin offer something that most other leathers don't. So if you're looking for something that's own look and feel, this is an option for that. It's also durable because the scales were intended to obviously be a protective element in the hide itself that's going to carry over into any leather goods that you make with it. Additionally, it's flexible, which can be great too, especially for things like belts, which are always in motion. Naturally, the hide was a flexible one, so in your finished good, it's going to be flexible as well. A few cons to look at. One is going to be cost. It's generally considered an exotic leather, and along with that, it's going to be a little more expensive than your typical leathers, such as a cowhide, or something like that. Also, it's going to be tricky to get sometimes, since it is a less commonly produced and a lower volume overall production of leather. Snakeskin can be tricky to get. It's definitely available. Some wholesalers specialize in it. So once you find one that is reputable, that's kind of like your go-to spot. And there's a few out there, but just be aware that it may take a little more looking to find it than it would your more common leathers. And one more thing to keep in mind is that the hides can be small. So it's going to restrict what you're going to make with it. So that can potentially be a con depending on what you have in mind to use it for. And when looking at good uses, here's a couple great ones. It can be used for clothing, vests, belts, boots and shoes. Certainly use elements in handbags, wallets, watch straps, accessories, jewelry, and it can even be used in some musical instruments. Now, how it's done is going to be sometimes they're going to be the full hide itself creates the item. Sometimes they're going to be accent pieces. So it's really going to depend on the size of the hide and the size of the finished good and how you want to integrate them. But there's a lot of good uses for snakeskin. And a few tips for working with snakeskin. One is going to be very aware when you're cutting how those cuts are going to align with the scales. Depending on how the finished good will be, essentially how you're going to handle those edges, you want to make sure that your cuts are going with the scales and not leaving a lot of kind of jagged visual looks to it. So keep that in mind and cut, consistently, not necessarily at an angle to it, unless that's a style you're going for. Another thing to keep in mind, if you're going to be hand stitching any of this, doing so with the scales can make it a little trickier. So you may want to mark the bottom side and kind of go through there, and then also use a test piece to see how your tools are going to respond to the scales. Whereas a natural leather, it's pretty predictable. With the scales, your awls or your irons may react a little differently. So just practice with them first so that you have a good result in the end. So there you have it, a look into snakeskin leather. It's an instantly recognizable type of leather. When you see things with it, it usually catches your eye, and it can be a really creative one to work with and integrate into some of your next projects. If you try it, it could be really worth your time.